March 9, 1945. In one single night, Tokyo burned so hot that the wind itself began pulling people into the flames. Entire neighborhoods disappeared before sunrise. By morning, nearly 100,000 people were dead. Not from an atomic bomb. From fire. And here is what most people don't realize. Hiroshima did not begin the destruction of Japan. By the time the atomic bombs fell in August 1945, 67 Japanese cities had already burned. This is the story of the fire that came first, the weapon built in a Harvard basement, the strategy that turned neighborhoods into targets, and the calculation that reshaped modern war. Before Hiroshima, Tokyo burned. It begins in Cambridge, Massachusetts, on February 14, 1942. In the basement of Harvard's Converse Laboratory, Professor Louis Frederick Fieser stood over a small metal tray containing a thickened gasoline mixture he had been developing. When he struck a match and lowered it to the surface, the reaction was different from ordinary fuel. It did not flash violently. It did not evaporate. It clung. It crawled. It burned steadily, stubbornly, refusing to extinguish. By mixing aluminum naphthenate and aluminum palmitate with gasoline, Fieser had created a gel, a substance that could adhere to surfaces and sustain intense heat. The name that would later define it came from those aluminum salts: napalm. At that moment, it was not conceived as an instrument of terror. It was a solution to a battlefield problem that American planners already understood was coming. Because the Pacific War was unlike the war in Europe. Across the islands of the Pacific, Japanese defensive doctrine emphasized fortification, endurance, and refusal to surrender. From Tarawa to Saipan, from Peleliu to the volcanic rock of Iwo Jima, American forces encountered a pattern that would define the campaign: deep cave systems carved into stone, reinforced bunkers, interlocking fields of fire, artillery placed in reverse slope positions immune to naval bombardment. High explosive bombs could destroy surface structures, but they could not easily penetrate tunnels. Naval guns could shake the ground, but defenders survived beneath it. Flamethrowers existed, but they required men to approach within terrifyingly short distances, and casualty rates among flamethrower operators were devastating. The problem was simple and brutal: how do you reach an enemy who lives underground? Napalm answered that question. It flowed. It adhered. It sustained heat. It entered spaces where blast pressure could not. By mid-1944, large-scale production was underway. The U.S. Chemical Warfare Service coordinated with private industry. Companies like Dow Chemical expanded manufacturing capacity rapidly. Millions of pounds of incendiary mixtures were produced. On the battlefield, the weapon was not spectacle. It was efficiency. In July 1944, during operations on Tinian in the Mariana Islands, American forces encountered heavily fortified Japanese positions embedded in coral limestone. Artillery alone proved insufficient. When incendiary weapons were introduced, defensive positions that once required hours or days to reduce were neutralized more quickly. Island warfare in the Pacific was measured in yards gained per day. Speed saved lives. Every bunker cleared without a repeated frontal assault meant fewer Marines exposed to interlocking machine gun fire. The logic was cold, but it was clear. Then came Iwo Jima. February 19, 1945. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had abandoned the suicidal Banzai charges of earlier campaigns. Instead, he constructed one of the most elaborate defensive systems of the war. Miles of interconnected tunnels, mutually supporting bunkers, hidden artillery, and fortified positions carved into volcanic rock. For days after the landings, American Marines advanced slowly under intense fire. The island itself seemed alive with resistance. Flame weapons became essential. Portable flamethrowers were used at close range, but even more significant were modified Sherman tanks equipped with flamethrower systems. These armored vehicles allowed incendiary streams to be delivered at greater distance, reducing exposure for operators. When directed into cave entrances, burning fuel traveled through tunnel networks. Positions that artillery could not silence were finally neutralized. The effect was tactical, not theatrical. It reduced fortified resistance. It shortened engagements. It allowed infantry to move. Iwo Jima ultimately cost over 6,800 American lives. Without flame weapons, that number would almost certainly have been higher. Okinawa followed in April 1945. Larger, more populated, more complex. Japanese forces again relied on underground defensive networks. Flame tanks and portable flamethrowers were used to reduce hardened positions. But Okinawa revealed a deeper complexity. Civilians were present in combat zones. Many had taken shelter in caves that also contained military positions. The Pacific War was no longer confined to isolated military garrisons. It blurred the line between battlefield and society. The moral weight deepened. The tactical logic remained. Yet even as napalm proved effective in tactical island warfare, its largest impact would come from somewhere else entirely. The sky. By late 1944, American high-altitude bombing over Japan faced serious challenges. The jet stream at 30,000 feet disrupted accuracy. Cloud cover obscured targets. And Japan's industrial production was decentralized. Unlike Germany, which concentrated production in large industrial complexes, Japan embedded war manufacturing within urban neighborhoods. Small workshops operated inside wooden homes. Machine parts were assembled beside kitchens. Entire residential districts functioned as industrial grids. Precision bombing struggled against this structure. General Curtis LeMay assumed command of XXI Bomber Command in January 1945. He faced a stark calculation. If high-altitude precision bombing could not break production, then production itself would have to burn. He ordered a shift, low-altitude, nighttime incendiary attacks targeting industrial urban zones. On the night of March 9, 1945, 334 B-29 bombers took off for Tokyo. Inside their bomb bays were clusters of M69 incendiaries, small bombs designed not for shock, but for ignition. Shortly after midnight, flares marked the city grid. Then thousands of incendiaries began to fall. Fires ignited in separate districts. Within hours, those fires merged. When enough fires connect, they stop behaving like individual flames. They create their own weather. Heat rises violently. Air rushes inward to replace it. Winds accelerate through narrow streets. The temperature climbs high enough to warp steel. Wooden homes collapse in minutes. Streets become corridors of flame. Rivers fill with people attempting to escape the heat. This was no longer a bombing raid. It was a firestorm. By dawn, approximately 16 square miles of Tokyo had been destroyed. Between 87,000 and 100,000 people were dead. More than 1 million were homeless. It remains the most destructive conventional air raid in history. And it happened in one night. The goal was not spectacle. It was acceleration. American planners were already preparing Operation Downfall, the invasion of the Japanese home islands. Casualty projections ranged from several 100,000 to potentially over 1 million American dead and wounded. Japanese doctrine called for mass civilian mobilization. Training included bamboo spears, explosive charges, and urban resistance tactics. Invasion would mean street-to-street combat across densely populated terrain. The incendiary campaign was a calculation. Break industrial capacity. Disrupt transportation. Overwhelm civil order. Force surrender before invasion became necessary. Between March and August 1945, 67 Japanese cities were attacked. Approximately 180 square miles were destroyed. Industrial output declined sharply. Transportation networks fractured. Japan did not surrender immediately. But it was weakening. When atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August, they did not strike an untouched nation. They struck a country already devastated by blockade and fire. Whether Japan would have surrendered without atomic weapons remains debated among historians. But there is broad agreement on one point: the incendiary campaign inflicted massive strategic damage before the atomic bombs were ever used. After the war, reflection followed. Some defended the campaign as a necessary measure to end the war quickly and avoid catastrophic invasion casualties. Others struggled with the scale of destruction inflicted upon civilian populations. International conventions later sought to regulate incendiary weapons. They were restricted, not banned. War rarely produces clean answers. But one reality stands clear. The Pacific War demonstrated something unprecedented in scale. The United States mobilized science, industry, logistics, and training systems into a unified machine. Napalm was not the only weapon. It was not the sole factor. But it symbolized something larger: industrial age warfare. Victory in the Pacific did not belong solely to courage on the battlefield. It belonged to production capacity, standardization, logistics, organizational efficiency. Factories that once produced automobiles pivoted to aircraft. Chemical plants scaled new compounds. Shipyards launched vessels faster than they could be sunk. The same system that built civilian prosperity became the engine of total war. And in total war, scale decides survival. In the caves of Iwo Jima, scorch marks remain. In Tokyo, memorials stand where entire neighborhoods vanished overnight. History does not erase the human cost, but it demands context. The Pacific War began with a surprise attack at Pearl Harbor. It escalated across islands soaked in blood. It ended only when Imperial Japan surrendered unconditionally. The firebombing campaign was not born from cruelty alone. It was born from calculation, a belief that ending the war sooner would ultimately save more lives than it destroyed. From a laboratory in Harvard to the skies over Tokyo, American science and industry reshaped modern warfare. Napalm did not win the Pacific War by itself. But it represented something decisive. In total war, survival belongs to the nation that can mobilize faster, produce more, and adapt without hesitation. The Pacific burned. The war ended. And from those ashes rose a different world.